Well, hi everybody. Welcome to the FSExpo 2024 Debrief. We are here talking all about the show that happened in Las Vegas. Hard to believe that it was already over a month ago. It feels like just yesterday we were all there at the Rio enjoying the sunshine, enjoying the warm weather, and of course just being able to hang out with each other and enjoy the show. But yeah, it's been over a month already. We've been busy here at FSExpo Association looking into 2025, working with different vendors, starting to secure everything that it takes to get the show ready to go. But we also wanted to take some time to look back and think about how things worked in 2024, get some of your feedback, share with you some of the feedback that came out of the survey. And so that's what we're here doing today, this afternoon. I'm going to have Phil on with me in just a couple of minutes when we get started. We're going to walk through the survey feedback. We'll share the charts that show exactly what you had to say about the show. We will answer any of your questions and we'll chat a little bit about some of the long answer feedback and, of course, answer any questions you might have as we look to 2025 in Providence and look to the future of our event. So, as we are getting started here, the chat for this session, as always, is in the Flight Sim Association Discord, which you can access with a free FSA account. You can access through your Flight Sim Expo registration. On our website, you can access the chat right beside the actual screen. You can also use the send a question feature. I'll keep an eye on both of those two things. And as we are getting started, just let us know if you came to the show this year in Las Vegas, if you'd write the word attended in the chat, as I see many of you have done. Thank you, Scott, Daniel, Derek. Looks like Scott, Philippe, Mike, and if you are watching us online, so you didn't actually come to the show, but you did our online only event like Ron, you could say watched. Thank you, Mike. And of course, if you are maybe somebody who hasn't been to the show before, but you're hoping to come in the future, say want to attend. And just let us know if you came to the show, if you watched it online, or if you're wanting to attend maybe in one of our future years. Scott, I hope you're feeling better. I know a couple people had a couple of things with getting sick. Fortunately, I was survived this one unscathed, and then right after this, I went to another air show where there were what felt like 100 like sniffling kids the entire weekend in the rain, and I still didn't get sick, which was super lucky. So I feel like I'm batting 1,000 on these couple of events. I see Robert attended, Marcelo, Jay, Andrew. Welcome, A Plato, Scotty. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you on with us. So I'm going to go find Phil, who I think is hiding in the background here somewhere. We're going to bring up some of these survey responses and we'll talk through everything there was about Flight Sim Expo 2024. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts, seeing your reactions. So I'll go find Phil. I'll be right back. All right, I found him. There he is. Hi, Phil.
How's it going? I feel
Good.
like that took you a long time to go find me.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's a little bit easier here than when we're at the show and you're over at registration and I have to go be in the speaking room, but we managed to find a way to make it work.
I know we should have done something more elaborate where like I emerged from below my desk or something and there's just like an empty chair.
That would have been a good idea, yes. I like Mike's comment that says he just licks everything to build up immunity. That's a good idea. I feel like I do that as well. Like the amount of food that I eat off the floor is kind of disturbing. I probably
Hmm.
should stop doing that.
So I guess both of you guys don't follow the 5 second rule then.
Well, I think that no, that's what I mean. It's like 5 seconds or less. I think that's fine, isn't it?
I guess so. I mean, I don't know how it worked for the immunity piece, but sure.
I don't know. It seems to generally be
It
working.
definitely
Although,
depends. Like I don't think I would be licking things like on a casino floor versus
yeah,
somewhere else.
yeah. Well, I think I was checking into a Marriott somewhere once, and they were doing like a free pizza if you signed up for Bonvoy, which of course I'm already a member, but I had another email, and so I just did that. And so I got the free pizza, and then I promptly dropped it like as I was on the way up to my room, and I'm like, well, how bad can hotel carpet be? And then I did get sick after that one, so I feel like maybe that was the line, but it was
There you
less than
go.
5 seconds. All right. So should we go into some survey feedback then, I guess?
Yeah, let's give the people what they want.
All right, sounds
or
good.
not. I'm
And
not sure why they're here, but you know.
and by the way, we did go through every single piece of feedback in the survey. Both Phil and I read it completely, and we do take the time to read every single comment. If you sent us something and you either wanted us to reply to it and we haven't, or if you said, "Hey, I can help out the show," but you didn't put an email address or like a way for us to find you, please send it to us. So I've gone through, I've responded to people who kind of gave us an email or who said, "I want to help out the show." So if I haven't responded to you, please send me an email and reach out and let us know. Obviously, looking for folks to help out in any number of ways. This is a community-driven event. We have lots of folks out there who are flight simmers who've come to us and said, "Hey, I run an AV company, or I'm a lawyer, or I run social media," and they have joined the team. So if that's you, and if you want to join our volunteer team, please send me an email, especially if you put a comment in the survey but you didn't leave an email, or if you did and we missed it, please do reach out to us. So let's go. We'll dive into some of the survey responses. These are just direct screenshots right from the Google form that we used, so there's no editing going on here. And you can see about 400, I think 430 people kind of responded to the survey overall. So that's what we're looking at in terms of responses here. And this first one breaks down where people attended the event from. So not hugely surprisingly, our biggest audience for this one would be the Western United States, which is pretty typical when we see our West Coast events. That would be consistent with us having been in Vegas in the past as well. And you can see the breakdown roughly for US attendees versus international is about 80% US, and then 18.6 is the exact international number, including 6.6 from Canada, and then obviously the rest coming from 48 other countries. So in grand total, 50 different countries that participated in the show in some form or another, and all 50 US states that were represented by the show as well. So that's always nice to see. That's been consistent with the past couple of years, a couple more countries than we've seen previously. And what I always find interesting about kind of where people come from is that this is obviously attendees that you're looking at right now, but if we showed you a map of the exhibitors, it's about 50-50, maybe even a little bit more international versus domestic. So we have a really big international crowd, especially when it comes to the exhibitor community. And the attendees, lots of countries, but definitely, 80% of the folks coming from the domestic United States, which is meaningful for us. And we'll talk about whether we want to move the show to other countries down the line with one of those questions, but that's an interesting stat for us to share. So that's kind of my take at look at basically who was responding to this survey. Now, this is obviously people responding to the survey, but this is also reflective of the actual registration data. So we look at where people come to the show from, and it's pretty much right on. So it's fair to say that this survey generally is pretty representative of the overall attendee base. So Phil, anything to add on where people come from, or anything to add about, we're talking about some states in a second here, but anything to add on that?
I think you hit it all. I would just double click on the fact that, yeah, if we were to show you a pie chart of the exhibitor or the sponsor breakdown, it would look very, very different than this. And so I think a lot of times people will be, there's a little bit of like location bias about people saying, oh, well, there's a lot of West Coasters who attended the event. Well, obviously the event was in the West Coast, but a lot of that international aspect, particularly the fact that the exhibitors are, like 50% international or so, that influences a lot of the decision making as well. So just kind of keep that in mind when you see some things about either like location or just this event, like Evan said, is sort of for everybody, and so we have to keep in mind where the exhibitors and sponsors are coming from, particularly because they're the ones who are shipping large quantities of items. That is not
Yes.
necessarily a cheap thing to do. It's a lot easier to bring yourself across the pond versus bring yourself plus, I don't know, an A320 simulator. So that's just something interesting to keep in mind.
Any guesses on which US state had the most attendees? So pop your guess in the chat there. From which US state do you think was our biggest state this year? I'm going to show you the top three, but if anybody has any guesses as to which state was the most popular, and while we're responding to that, Philippe's comments, guess it helps that Fly By Wire is international. Our members that were there counted basically for different countries for exhibitors. There's like 5 to 6 different countries for fly-by-wire alone, and that's true of many of our exhibitors as well. You have developers who are coming to the event where they may not have met their entire team before the show, or this might be the one time in the year where their team actually gets together because the rest of the year they're working all around the country, and so that's really cool for us to see. What have we got? Some guesses here. California. Daniel says Las Vegas State, which I guess would be Nevada, which is what Raymond also says. Scott says Texas. Couple Texas guesses. Yeah, Arizona, couple Californias. All right. Well, I can tell you the Californias have it. So bottom of the screen is 2024. Top of the screen is the comparison is last year. So for Vegas, California was the top with 21%. And then you've got Nevada following that, 12%, Texas 8%, and I put Florida on there as the honorable mention because, of course, it was where we held the show back in 2019. And then just looking at a comparison back to 2023, where, of course, we were in Houston, you can see Texas at 42%, California is still holding strong there with 9%, and Florida with 7%. So I think it's interesting that you look at 2023, there was like a really, really big Texas focus, and I think that would have been the same if you look back at the stats in Orlando in 2019. You'd see a lot of Florida, and in Las Vegas, I think there was a little bit more distribution. So hopefully, what that shows is that more people are coming to the event from different parts of the country, kind of following the event, coming maybe for their first year in Texas, and then coming back again in Las Vegas, which obviously is what we would love to see. So hopefully that trend continues, but I think that's a good indication. And I don't actually know how this compares with the U.S.'s most popular states, but it's probably pretty close anyway, with at least Texas and Florida in there.
Yeah, you're probably missing the Northeast, which of course is one of the places that we've not held a previous event, but that will
Right.
end next year, 2025, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I think you bring up a good point with, it's not surprising here that the places we've held previous events are also the places where we have our largest attendee base come from. And that's, like you said, somewhat intentional in that the idea here is that as the show moves around, you kind of pick people up at each stop, and then you hope that they keep coming to future events. And so that's one of the reasons why there's an advantage to moving the event around versus just, for example, holding it in Las Vegas every single year. You'll have, a large number of repeat customers from that area, but there are other folks from around the other, the rest of the country who might not be necessarily getting. So that's one of the strategies of trying to move around. And again, that's one of the reasons why we're also excited that we're going to the Northeast next year, one of the places that we have not been geographically within the US.
Yeah, absolutely. Phil, question from Scott that you can answer. How many people did we have this year? How many people did we have last year? What's the difference there?
Yeah, the short answer is that we're about 500 up from last year. So I think this year the total number was, I want to say, 2441, if I remember correctly, or something right around there. And last year was just shy of 2000, so it's like 1960.
Yeah,
So
so
about 500 more than last year.
yeah, which is like in the flight sim world, I think is pretty huge. I mean, it's hard to put that like into context because we have two shows in the flight sim world, and so there's not a whole lot of context to add to that. But I think like to see 500 more people come to the show this year versus last year, I think that's huge. And then of course we have the online audience, all of our FSA captains watching as well. So big differences there, and that's great to see the show keep growing. Obviously, we don't want to stop there. We do want to see this show continue to grow. We want to reach more people who could be flight simmers, maybe even considering reaching people who are outside of the core flight sim audience who could become flight simmers or who just might want to be interested in some of the other forms of simulation. Like we saw Thrustmaster had their wheels this year. We had a couple of other companies there with different forms of sim that weren't straight flight sim, and we'll talk about that later too. But I think that's something that's just interesting because we know there's a lot of crossover between flight sim and other forms of various simulation games. So let's get into some of what you actually thought about the show. The first couple questions on the survey, those of you who took it will remember we asked you a bunch of different questions about your experience. You had to rate those questions from 1 to 4, with 1 being poor and 4 being great. And we don't give you 5 options because otherwise everyone picks the middle. So you had to pick a side if you liked it or you didn't like it. So this is a sense just overall in terms of kind of what people had to say about the show. So starting off on the very far left there, overall events seems like generally people were pretty happy with it. Most people giving us 3 or a 4, so that's always good to see. And then this is pretty typical as you move across to the right. The city is always tending to be a little bit more of a controversial topic. So in the long answer survey data, we see this as well. Lots of people saying they love Vegas, that should be there every year, don't ever move it. And lots of people going, I don't ever want to go back to Vegas again, please don't hold the show again there. So we get that quite a bit. And I would bet if you go and actually cut some of this data on who lives where, you'll see people who are in the West Coast saying, yeah, Vegas is a great venue, and you'll see people who are traveling from further going, maybe it's not so much. So that's pretty consistent. And I would say as well on the venue piece, so moving one more to the right, that also has been fairly consistent with what we've seen in previous years. It is always a struggle for us to find a venue that works, that fits with as many people's budgets as we can, and that meets everybody's expectations. So we usually see that probably where we would like score the worst, so to speak, is on the venue, and I think that's not a big surprise surprise to us. And really, it will come down to whether we decide we can actually go back there. This is the first year we have ever been able to go back to our venue. So if you think back, obviously Houston, we outgrew that museum pretty quickly. The hotel we had in San Diego for 2021 has more than doubled in hotel room rates. So you've told us that that's probably outside of our budget. Same story going back to the hotel we had in Orlando in 2019. And then if you go back all the way to 2018 at Flamingo, we've outgrown that too. So we do have the option to go back to the Rio, which is exciting. And of course, they are in the middle of that renovation. So that will all be done as we move forward into the look for venues in 2026 and beyond. So definitely something that we have as an option that we haven't had in the past, which is exciting for us. Like options would be a great thing for this show as opposed to having to go to only one place. So that's kind of interesting. I think we looked at the sort of broad data there. Venue wise, it was mostly sort of people like just, I didn't like the smokiness. I didn't like the long walk from the hotel room. And it's like, well, that's just what Vegas is. So that was kind of my reaction on location and city. Phil, anything you want to add to some of those things?
No, I think you covered it well. I will say that it was encouraging that if you look at the venue data this year, it was in general more positive than last year, right? Like last year, we
Yeah,
knew there were some issues in Houston, heat, broken air conditioning, et cetera. So while not everybody had a perfect experience, I think
that's true.
overall it was far more positive than last year. And so to your point, if you look at this chart you're showing right now, yeah, venues probably the worst category there, just kind of taking a quick glance at it. But in general, those are still pretty good numbers. So we're looking at that as event organizers and saying, actually, that's a mark that would probably give us an option to going back to the Rio in the future if we wanted to, knowing what comes with Las Vegas. To your point about smoky casino atmosphere, that's just what you're going to get there.
Yeah, and they want us back too, which is also a really good thing for us
Yeah.
and maybe unusual in some other cases. Like I've said before, we're not a group that a lot of properties will want. We talk to a number of properties and they look at what we want in terms of a hotel rate and they look at the fact that we're only spending like $150,000 in F&B only, 150,000, and they're like, yeah, you know what, that we can get a group that will be double all of those things easily, so we don't want you. Like they don't even want to talk to us. And so having a venue that wants us back, that's actually quite exciting for a change. I think also on the Rio, we have to remember that we were able to make that show happen in the matter of a couple of weeks with them. They were extremely responsive. They were able to make this event happen. So we're really grateful to them for that. And that was something that I think a lot of other venues probably just wouldn't have even been able to do. So that was really cool for us. What is really interesting too about 2025 now is that we do have a few other options. So whereas at the Rio it was kind of like, yeah, of course you could stay anywhere else, but we really did encourage you to come and stay with us on property. The fact that you did book at the Rio, that helps the show because we have to guarantee a certain number of hotel rooms, as you most likely know. So now in Providence, we do have a host hotel that's the Omni connected to the convention center, but there are like 5 or 6 different other hotels that are right around downtown Providence. So if you're a Bonvoy member and you want to get your points, you can stay at a Marriott property. And if you're a Hilton member of H Honors, I think it is, you can go and stay at the Hilton that's right there. And so there will be a few different options. And if folks do want to stay at somewhere that's at a little bit of a lower price point, you want to stay out by the airport, options exist for that too. So I think that is the advantage of the convention center model that we're seeing in Providence versus the kind of like do it in one big hotel where we really, really need people to be staying on property. So that'll be interesting to see how things go. Of course, that cuts both ways because now not everyone is at the same physical hotel. We will have most people probably at the Omni. I think we have like 450 rooms there, so it'll be a lot of us, but we used something like 750-ish rooms, I think, in Vegas, so it won't accommodate everybody. And pro tip, that will be important for you to book early because those rooms I expect probably by like January, February are going to be sold out, and then there'll be plenty of other options, but you won't be right there at the Omni. Moving on, I think now to some of the seminar stuff. So FS Expo Friday is that next one. That's this group of numbers right here, and then the weekend and educational seminars just to the right of that. So people generally liking all of those things. We'll talk more about Expo Friday. Great to see the weekend seminars getting some good positive feedback. Those are all community created content, people who've come to us and said, hey, I want to talk about this subject, and we're like, sure, here's the stage, go for it. And so I think that worked out really well. We'll talk more about the FSElite stage 2 in a second, but overall I think people enjoyed the seminars, enjoyed the AV. So Phil, kind of your thoughts and your take on all that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I know that there was a few people in the comments on the survey who said, hey, I would love to have a seminar on X topic, or there's even one or two people who said,
Yeah.
hey, I could volunteer and give a topic on this
Yes.
subject, but they didn't leave us their contact information. So if you're one of those folks, particularly the person who had a connection with Delta Airlines, please let us know, because those seminars sounded pretty awesome. So yeah, I think your point about these being community driven is definitely good to highlight. So, the folks who said I didn't like the content, well, unfortunately, sort of this is, what was proposed to us this year, and next year we'll be doing the same thing again. So if there's somebody out there who would be good to kind of prod or nudge and say, hey, you should do a presentation, please send them our way, because we love to hear all the topics that come in every year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the stuff about like speaking topics too, you can reach out to me. You can apply to speak at the show when the application goes live on our website, and reach out to someone. If there's someone in the community who you follow on YouTube or you're watching on Twitch and you're like, hey, I really think you should speak at the show, we do an open process. People send in their speaker applications, and then you, the people who are coming to the show, you voted on that stuff and you picked it and you decide who gets the microphone and who gets to speak. So I think that's really a reflection of what the community wants, and I think the survey data kind of shows that we got that right, which is nice. I know we always kind of struggle, like between me and Phil in the early years, we were like, okay, we're gonna like go out and find a speaker to cover this topic, and we thought that'd be super popular, and it was like okay, but it definitely wasn't the most popular. And then sometimes you think, okay, this session, well, I don't think there's gonna be that many people, so we're gonna put it in the smaller room, and then it's all of a sudden like, oh gosh, that room is full, we should have put it in the big one. So it's always hard for us to tell, and that's why we've switched around to allowing folks from the community to actually vote on stuff, and we have two similarly sized stages this time around, so it's a bit easier for us to kind of say, okay, here's what's going to go where, because basically you guys are voting on it. So I think that's a nice way to do things, and we'll keep that going obviously as we continue on. Good to see the volunteers as well. Generally got great feedback. They always do. Typically, that's the category that always scores the best on the average. So that's nice for us to see. And of course, super thankful to all of the volunteers for doing what they do to make this show possible. As you know, they come to the show, they are flight simmers. And so just amazing stuff that they're able to basically year after year pull out all of the stops to make the event exactly what it is. Phil, anything you want to add before we jump on to the next slide?
Nope, you got to move on.
All right, so second half of this, continuing on, registration process. I'm surprised that we scored well on registration, because neither Phil nor I were too happy with the way that that worked this year in terms of the lineup that we had on Friday and Saturday. So I wanted to just spend a bit of time talking about that. I think we looked in Houston, we had some lineup issues. Those we were able to trace to a system issue, which we did resolve this year, so we're happy about that. And now we thought, okay, this year is going to go very smoothly, and it did go smoothly, but it was just too much. So there were just more people than we thought that we could handle with the number of stations that we had. So a couple things that we're looking at for next year: we'll have some self check-in stations, so that will just help to speed the process along, and just more check-in stations. We have looked at doing a few different things, like, do you try to mail people out a badge in advance, or do you try to find other ways to do this? And it just doesn't work for any number of reasons, including cost, including logistics, including what happens if somebody is registered too late. So there's really no practical way, I think, other than what we have. We're very proud of the registration provider that we use and the partner that we use to do the badge printing. I think it's a really cool system. I think it's great that you get to have a badge with your name on it that's customized in the way that you want. So we just need to make that process a little bit faster for a couple of hours. We are also going to do a little bit more on the Thursday. So I think the plan is media partners, exhibitors, they can do a little bit more checking in on Thursday. So that will help give us some extra capacity, and we'll open registration a bit earlier on the Friday. Also looking at maybe do we do like a satellite registration area, say at the hotel check-in desk, or frankly, the airport is actually willing to have us there too, although I think the logistics of that might be a bit tricky for us. So we definitely have that note that we need to make that faster, even though it didn't come up a whole lot in the survey, and that's something we want to look at for sure. Phil, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. But Evan and I, before every year, we kind of have a predictions session that we do. And my
Yeah,
prediction this year was that the issues we were going to have were issues of scale, which is great in the sense that means the event is growing, right? But it's bad in the sense that means that you obviously have to try and update your processes. And so this was definitely one of the ones that was very obvious to us early on, where on Friday, when there was that long line, we were already having the maximum number of check-in stations that we basically had from the provider. And we were already doing the minimum interaction time in terms of like trying to get somebody's badge printed and then have them off to the seminar room and then getting the next person in line. And that was already done. And of course, there was still that huge line down the hallway, which again, on some levels is impressive. On the other hand, there's honestly nothing more that Evan and I hate than a long line. So that was kind of painful to watch. And so I think all the topics that Evan mentioned there, particularly the self-check-in stations, and actually I just sent the email out to our badge provider this morning trying to get the process rolling for next year. And I said, we're going to need to try and talk about some self-check-in stations. So I think this will be one that hopefully we're able to mitigate next year, just by having more bandwidth, but also having check-in available at more time. So particularly doing an early registration for those who are on site on Thursday afternoon, for example, will probably be something that we're looking at.
Yeah, and I think on badge design, we looked at, can we do a different badge for exhibitors? Can we do something that makes the exhibitors stand out a little bit more? And we just haven't found a way to make that work in practice. Like it means ordering different badge designs, which means you have to do a different quantity. It means taking out one or more badge stations just to dedicate to the exhibitors, which then of course impacts the capacity. And it ends up being very logistically complicated. Like Phil just said, we really hate a line, and that anything that kind of slows everything down is something we're really cognizant of. So what I think we're going to do, pending some feedback from our sponsor who will do the lanyards next year, which is Navigraph, is I'd like to see maybe a different badge type, or sorry, not badge type, different lanyard type, or different color at least for the exhibitors. And that way it'll be really clear, like, okay, this person is an exhibitor, they've got the exhibitor lanyard, but try to keep the badge the same. And that way we aren't kind of dealing with the extra logistics of having two different badge designs, which really adds a lot of complexity. It's definitely doable, but basically what these things come down to is complexity means slowing things down, and it means extra cost, and we're trying to make sure that we don't have to be increasing registration rates, which is where that would all be leading. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
way we want to try and do things. Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Also seeing a couple comments in the chat about stickers, which are a
Yeah,
really fantastic idea. They're great for standing out, particularly if you're a speaker or you're an exhibitor, right? Having like a little ribbon on the bottom of your badge. Where it doesn't help is the interaction time, right? So there's a lot of effort involved with saying, even like there was a few comments on the survey about like if you're a first-time simmer or you're interested in general aviation versus airliners, can we somehow differentiate that on the badge? Very difficult to do that in practice outside of just having ribbons that are on a table, and it's kind of a self-service thing.
which
And then,
then
of course,
like
the question
anybody could
becomes how
put the
many,
exhibitor badge on or whatever,
right?
right?
So
Yeah,
then the question becomes how many ribbons do you do and all this kind of stuff.
yeah,
So,
that too.
like the idea, but very difficult to implement in practice. So, something that's kind of on our minds, but I don't think you're going to see that next year. Probably the lanyard differentiator will be the primary way that we go and see how that works next year.
And I think we have asked the question to our badge provider, who already has told us like we're by far the most complicated badge they've ever done, and we already get yelled at for them by making this very complicated, especially with the airport codes and all that. But we've asked them, is there something else that we could do to try to handle this question of making it more obvious who's an attendee, who's an exhibitor, who's a speaker? But it is difficult. Like for example, Austin's talking about fonts colors. Like we actually can't change the font color because the only thing they can print is in black. If you wanted to have it pre-done, like so the way we have like the colored background, that's actually pre-printed, and then we live print, say, their name. So we can't make that a different color. Like that just doesn't exist right now. So again, you can look at, I'm sure there's like a colored badge printer out there somewhere, and it probably ends up taking longer. And we're just trying to make that interaction time super, super quick. But it is on our mind. We do have that note as well, and I think we'll see how the lanyards work. And we are looking at, is there something else that we can actually do, like in the badge design or on the badge type? So those are a couple of the feedback that we saw on the badges, I think. And I like the color ribbons idea, but I do acknowledge Phil's point that like how many would you order, what number of them are there, and then like if somebody has like 12 of these ribbons hanging off their badge, then how meaningful is it? So things that we are looking at, and we definitely had those notes. I think that was my main list of things for registration. So move on to activities, which is one that is a hot button topic between the two of us right now, and that we're looking at actively. So I've already reached out to the airport in Providence, and as you may know, the Go Providence, which is the convention bureau of the city, basically came to Flight Sim Expo. One of the main reasons they came there was for them to understand the group and get a sense as to what kinds of things might be meaningful, what kinds of other activities and offsite activities could we actually look at doing. So I think if I'm summarizing the activities feedback from 2024, the people who got to go on an ATC tour or who did some of our offsite activities like Dig This Vegas and the Mob Museum tour, they really liked it. The people who did not get the chance to go because they weren't able to register on time, they didn't know about it in time, there just weren't enough spots, etc. Obviously, there was some angst about that, and people, of course, wanting those tours as a nice way to cap off the Flight Sim Expo experience. So this one's tricky because obviously you can only do so many tours. We did, I think, 150 plus, which is the most that Vegas has ever done. We had a number of other activities that people could pay for and did, and I think seemed to have a pretty good time. But there's always going to be a limited capacity, and I think knowing the group, the airport slash ATC slash whatever tour, which is very highly contingent upon the local airport and the local government helping us out, there's always going to be a limited number of people there. And so, how do you deal with the fact that there's maybe going to be 100 or 200 or 300 if we're lucky spots for like 3,000 attendees? There's always going to be that differential. And so, that's an area where we're going to continue to do our best and figure out ways to do that. Maybe there's a lottery system, but that gets complicated. Maybe we do it in some other way. But it's like there's a nice simplicity to the first come first serve that works really well for us. And I would say comparing the two, like last year where we did kind of a bit of a lottery system at times, and this year we just did like a straight first come first serve, it was a lot more manageable, and we did more than triple the number of tours in a way that was much more sustainable. So the question is, can we keep that going year after year? And Phil, I know you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think you hit on all the major points. I was talking earlier about how the issues that we had this year, my prediction was they were going to be issues of scale, and this is exactly one of those comments, right? Where you kind of said it. But this year we did, I think, 160 people got to do the ATC tour in Las Vegas, which not surprisingly was overwhelmingly the most popular because this is an aviation-minded crowd, right? So that was the largest number of tours that a facility like that has ever done before. And that was less than, what, 10% of our attendee base, right? Because we had over 2,400 people at the show. You're never going to be able to get 2,000 people going through a facility tour at the FAA. It's just not going to happen. And so, sure, maybe you're in a place where there's a facility tour, there's an airline maintenance tour, and a simulator tour or whatever, right? Okay, so now you're at 400 people doing tours. Well, guess what? That's still less than, by basically a quarter of your attendee base. So how do we try and make this be manageable going forward? There's always going to be basically a haves and haves not scenario, which is really unfortunate because, like you said, Evan, the feedback that we got was largely if you got to go on a tour, it was awesome. But if you missed out on the tour because we either didn't know it existed or because the tours literally went in the first 60 minutes and they were gone, how do we try and manage that going forward? And as the attendee number hopefully grows over time, that's going to become more and more of an issue. And sure, we can look at lottery systems, points-based systems. Those all get very, very complicated very, very quickly. And you have to keep in mind that we're also trying to launch and run these activities during what is typically the 2 months or so leading up to the show, which is the time that Evan and I get extremely busy trying to shore up exhibitors and other things like that. And so
Phil's saying that like he does anything on the activities, but that's fine. Sure. Thank you.
Right. So there's a bit of a resource contingency issue here in that, again, if we were to try to implement some very complicated lottery system, that is coming at the expense of us being able to do other things for the show in the last minute kind of leading up here. And so how do we manage that going forward is one of the things that we're trying to think about. Don't have an answer right now, but it's something that's definitely on our minds.
And like my fellow Canadians there in the chat, like I hear you, like I get it. You can't go on a tour. I'm going to Boston this weekend, and we are doing our annual Boston Tea Party live event, and everybody else is going on a tour of Boston Center and Boston Approach, and I am not because even though I can fly an airplane into DCA, it would be too security sensitive for me to go on a tour of Boston Approach, right? I'm there, I get that. So it's funny, but also it's a good point. Like if you're from anywhere outside of the U.S. and you don't get to go on one of these tours, we are excluding you. So is there some way we can solve that? I think Houston, it was really cool. We were able to do the airside tour. Only 30 people got to do that, but it was unrestricted. Internationals could participate. The FAA, it's always going to be U.S. citizens only, at least as far as we can do. For them to do anything, the scale of what they're doing, it's already a lot. So then to throw on that we're going to have international people on there is just too much. But is there an opportunity to do an airport tour? And we tried in Vegas, we tried for Nellis as well, totally got shot down for all of those options. So I think, something like that would be nice, but obviously if we're always going to see that roadblock for international people going on tours, then maybe is that a reason to say, well, we're not going to do that anymore because it just doesn't make sense for those folks. So it's definitely something that we have to think about. And again, I think the point is interesting. I always make the point. It's like, okay, well, you're coming to Flight Sim Expo for Flight Sim Expo, not for the tours. But we definitely see people, especially when everything is sold out in maybe the beginning of June. Like people have literally said to me, like, well, should I still come to the event if all the tours are sold out? I'm like, yeah. The point is to come to the event. There's all this stuff going on. Like, never mind the tours, right? But that is something that we have to be cognizant of, that it doesn't almost have that negative impact. So we're definitely looking at that and open to any suggestions as I just kind of read some of the chat messages there. It's a thing that we know is going to be only available to a certain subset of people. And so what does that mean for its future? Of course, I don't know. And yeah, I mean, Nellis, I tried, and they were like, no, there's no chance. Don't even try.
Yeah.
So that's the activities.
There,
Anything else on that, Phil?
Yeah, just, I mean, I'll try and move off the subjects. I know we got a lot more to talk about, but just also, I would say that we've been incredibly lucky on the HC tours in that none of them have actually been canceled, despite Houston trying
Yeah,
to do so at the last minute last year. And so there's also a world in which, great, we have 200 plus, individuals lined up to go on a tour, and the facility calls us literally 10 minutes before the first
yeah,
tour is
that can
going to
happen
leave and
too.
says, guess what? Whatever has happened, nobody's going on the tour anymore. And then this very quickly, backfires in that sense. So the thing with the activities is that, again, if you got to go on one, they're typically very, very positive, but they're also a fairly high risk, in terms of the facility tours being able to be canceled last minute. And then also, you've already kind of mentioned this, but there's that double-edged sword that we're starting to see where, because not everybody can go on them, we actually get folks emailing us with what you said, Evan, a couple weeks before the show saying, hey, just found out about it through the local radio advertisement or whatever. I see that everything is booked, meaning that all the activities are booked. Is it still worth coming to the show? And the point is like, yes, of course. The point of coming to the show is to go tour the exhibit hall and see the seminars. The activities are just a bonus, but it doesn't always come across that way when you're seeing a bunch of things that say booked or sold out. And so from that standpoint, there is kind of this question of, how do we try and make this scalable in the long term? Or does that mean that activities might actually have to go away? That's something that we are grappling with. But for now, as Evan said, we've reached out to the facilities in Providence, in the airport in Providence, and hopefully, given the level that the city itself is supporting us this year, we'll be able to make something happen. But I do think there's a question mark on those activities, going forward over the long term.
So just to finish off the rest of the slide, this fourth one over from the left is there was always something to do at Flight Sim Expo. That was your reaction to that. So most people kind of giving that a 4 or a 3. Definitely some polarity on that question. I think generally the long answer, for everyone who would have said yes, 4, there was a ton to do, I want an extra day. There was also somebody who said, I was through the whole show floor in an hour and there was nothing to do. You need like 300 more exhibitors. So we definitely got a lot of mixed reaction on those ones. We could talk about that a little bit more. The next one is the digital floor plan, and we'll talk about that one as well. And then the last one on the slide here is I want to attend Flight Sim Expo next year. So that gives you a kind of a sense as to the overall big picture. I want to dive into some of the more detailed questions that we asked people just to see how some of those reactions were. So one of the big questions that we asked, which I think I actually added after the show because I felt like Friday went maybe a little bit long. We asked people how long Flight Sim Expo Friday was, and overwhelmingly 78% said just right, which is kind of a surprise. I thought we'd get a little bit more too longs, and the too long and the too short are almost exactly the same. 10% said too short, and 11.5% said too long. So I think that survey result would show that we're probably on the right track. I am tempted to go just a touch shorter in 2025. So I think what we're looking to do is make that end maybe a little bit more like 5 or 5:15 instead of the 5:30, 5:45, and add a little bit more break time in there. It was a jam-packed day, and I never want to turn away somebody who has an announcement. We had people who couldn't participate live. We had Blackbird who wanted to do something. We ended up having the video go. So there's stuff like that I hate to say no to, but at the same time, I think that day, to me anyway, just felt like a little bit too long. So I think I'd just shorten that up a little bit. But I was surprised to see that most people were like, no, it was good. Leave it as it is. So I think that's the main item there. Other notes for Friday that we had, I think people generally liked the reaction panel, and it works really nicely within the context of the day. You can't really do it without having something on the stage going on while we're switching out presenters and handling all the last minute stuff that happens. So I think you can look to see a relatively similar type of show on Friday next year, just perhaps a little bit shorter.
Yeah, and I think what's also important to note that the Friday seminars, just like the weekend seminars, are crowdsourced in the sense that we ask exhibitors to sign up for these, and they do so, and that's who makes up that Friday session. So a lot of comments about, well, why wasn't so and so part of the Friday session?
Right.
The answer is because they didn't sign up, and we have to go ask them directly as to why that was the case. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. And the other piece of this too that I'd be open to hearing feedback from the chat on is kind of the schedule nature of this. So because we have folks that are signing up for these things literally last minute, as Evan was saying, that's why there is no schedule that is published months in advance saying, hey, from 1 to 1:20, it's this seminar and so on and so forth. And we think that that actually works out kind of well in the sense that, if you're purchasing the Friday add-on, it's because you want to be in the room when these announcements drop. And
You're in it
to
for
a
the
certain extent,
surprise, just
yeah,
like me.
exactly. It should be a surprise, and it sort of should be irrespective of who's actually presenting. So we actually don't want to create a scenario where someone's like, "Oh, I'm going to show up from 1 to 1:20 because that's the seminar that I care about," and then walk out and I'll come back 3 hours later, kind of thing. We want folks to be in the room because, to a certain extent, that is what the developers who are doing these presentations want to see, right? Like we are telling them that they should show up to these presentations because they need to go wow the crowd, right? And so therefore, the crowd needs to be there. So it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg there, but I think that it's just important to keep in mind that, again, the folks that are there in terms of the developers, they're there because they have an announcement to make, and that's kind of how that is ultimately constructed as the day goes on. And there are people who, sign up early and then say, oh, you know what, actually the announcement that I wanted to do is not going to be ready, so they drop out. We have people who last minute say, hey, guess what, I have a new product ready and I want to make it happen at Flight Sim Expo. And I think that will continue to be fluid as we go here.
Yeah, and I mean that's the excitement of this day to me. Like I get that, schedules change, but for me like that's exciting. Like somebody comes to me the day before and is like, "Yo, I just finished this product. I don't think it's going to be ready, but it's ready. Can we put it in there?" Like I love stuff like that. I mean, it's chaotic, but it's so much fun because you're getting the raw, the right away, the literally just in time news, and that's exciting for us. So we want to try to keep that, and we want to keep Friday growing. I mean, we started this concept I think in 2023, so this is only our second year doing it, and we're trying to talk to more developers and say, this is the way to make an announcement. Like, come to Friday, talk about it on the stage. I had some great conversations with a number of developers. SoFly was one of them. The bundle that he announced, like within the first hour on Saturday morning, it had completely sold out. And I'm like, that is the point, right? You come on the stage, you make a big announcement, and then people get excited about it. And of course, in addition to the people in the room, it's people around the world who are watching and being able to share in that experience. Like, where else in Flight Sim do we have like everyone's eyeballs all in the same place? And so if developers can come to the table with a big announcement like Bluebird did to kick things off on the Friday, that's the kind of thing that we're going for. And I think developers are starting to get that message, and I'm hoping more of them are like, okay, I need to have something to show on that Friday. Like I want them to be planning. I want them to be thinking about it as opposed to being like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to announce my product 2 weeks before the show and we'll see what happens, right?
I think we are starting to turn the corner there. I remember on Friday evening, and actually even into Saturday, I was scrolling the homepage of FSElite, and literally the 10 or 15 articles that were making up the homepage as you scroll down were all things that were announced in the last 6 to 12 hours at Flight Sim Expo. And I remember thinking in that moment, we're finally getting there where
Yeah.
like people are announcing things at the show and it is starting to create its own news cycle. And that is exactly what FS Expo Friday is supposed to be. And I think, again, we're getting there, right? Kind of seeing us create that concept in Houston last year and then do it again this year. It's like, okay, this is starting to catch on. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what happens at Friday in Providence, Rhode Island.
And like WinWing, I mean, what a way to do it, right? Like announce something big on
Yeah.
Friday, have it at your booth, let everybody try it on the weekend. I mean, that's perfect. So hopefully more people get a hold of that. Frank asked about how the order is determined. Usually we will ask developers or they will ask us. So in the case of Laminar, like that was their request to go last. Bluebird was their request to go first. And then we try to make it work in a way that makes sense. So if I know that somebody has a more complicated presentation, maybe they have to bring up their own computer, I'll try to put them right after a break. And then otherwise I'll try to, shorten. So if there's a short one, I'll put a long one after it and just try to make it work in a way that makes logical sense. So there's definitely some structure we try to put around that and some thought that we plan and put around it as well. But then, of course, things can change at the last minute. And so that's another one of the reasons why I really don't think it makes sense to put a proper schedule. Like you're coming for a show. It's like you're going and watching a sporting event, like a basketball game or a hockey game, right? So you kind of know, okay, here's the big blocks of time, but I'm not going to tell you at what point in the first period the goal is going to be scored because that would defeat the purpose of coming to the game. So I think that's like the goal that we're trying to get out of this experience. And I think hopefully anyway, we're on the right track with it. So let's move on and talk about the printed event guide. This was a new item this year. Apparently, a few people didn't know about it because we had some people in the survey that were like, "Hey, you need a printed schedule," and I'm like, "Here it is." But anyway, we were asking this question because I think between the two of us, like Phil is usually, or at least with this item, I think Phil wanted to see the guide. I am like a totally digital person. I would not want anything printed, so I was very much against this, but it made sense, so we did it anyway. And in typical Flight Sim Expo attendee fashion, you guys are exactly split on the matter. So 42% said don't print an event guide. The digital floor plan that we had, as well as the mobile hub that we launched this year, was enough. And 58% of you said you should please continue to print them. So I don't know what that leaves us, Phil, but we'll probably have to keep doing it.
I think we're going to keep doing this one. I think the short answer on this one is more information, or at least the same information in more places is better.
It's
So
good, yeah.
the on doing the event guide again will not come at the expense of the on-site mobile website that we created. That will continue to be improved next year. We already have some ideas for how that works. Where this actually came in really handy, Evan, I'm not sure I mentioned this one to you directly, but there's a number of times where we have folks who come up to the registration desk and they say, "Hey, where's this thing?" or "What's that thing?"
Mm.
And in the past, I kind of had to be like, "Oh yeah, I see the hole down there. You go that way, you
Right,
take a
yeah.
right turn or whatever." And here I can just be like, "Here's this piece of paper. Let me get a pen out. I'm going to draw you a line, and I'm going to circle, and like, here you go. Take it away with you." That was really,
Yeah.
really valuable. So I think there was also an interesting way of being able to do some highlights and try and give some extra visibility to certain exhibitors. So, for example, like the diamond sponsors had their logos that were on
Yeah.
their booth locations. That was kind of a nice tidbit and that sort of thing. So I think we'll continue to do this one in the future. The thing we have to try and hone is how many to print, because we basically printed enough for everybody and not everybody took one. So we ended up throwing away a lot of paper, which is unfortunate. And that's what we'll try and get better on in the future.
Yeah, and I think overall, like we came into this show having heard in Houston that we needed better ways for people to get information, and I think we were able to do that between the on-site guide, the printed guide. We made some changes to our website to make the schedule easier to see from a mobile device, and I think we haven't heard that feedback at all. Like people have been saying it was easy to find what they needed to find, and I didn't see any real comments like I really wanted to go see this, but I couldn't figure out where it was. So I think we managed to make that work out, which is nice. So I'm happy with that. Jumping on FSElite stage. So this is one that one of my, I guess I could probably say friends at this point. We did Air Venture together a couple times. Developer in the flight sim community, Nick from FlightFX, whose real job has a lot to do with big events. He has been saying to me since San Diego, we have to have a stage in the exhibit hall. And I've been saying to him, it's never going to work. It'll be too loud. It'll be too noisy. Nobody will go to it. And I was completely wrong. So I like when I'm proven wrong. He definitely got the win on this one. People loved the FSElite stage, so 87% said, yeah, great having it right on the show floor, and 13% said, no, seminars should be held in the dedicated rooms. I was really thinking, gosh, it's going to be loud, it's going to be distracting, and I really don't think it was. I walked by there, the sound was good where you were right in the seats. If you stepped away from it, it really wasn't overly distracting. Talked to some of the developers. Verpal was right there, Vatsim was right there. They were totally happy with the way that the noise was, and I think it added this really cool energy atmosphere to the show floor. There were some people who really wanted to be kind of like a smaller presentation, more of a Q&A, more intimate than we could do on the big stage, and I think that worked out really nicely in that space. So that's something that we'll look to continue. And I think the actual content on that stage, which was totally managed by FSElite, by the way, was really cool. I mean, there were developers who were there giving the more detailed version of what they had announced on FSExpo Friday, doing the Q&As, people who probably wouldn't have had or made a big splash on Friday. Like I think about the Sporties Infinite Flight announcement, perfect for that kind of thing. So I think we'll probably continue that and maybe even look to make that even more central next year.
Yeah, and you already mentioned it, but kudos to FSElite for this thing, right? Like we gave
Yeah.
Kellen from FSElite basically we said there's going to be a stage with a projector and a screen and some chairs. Make it happen, right?
Yeah.
And that's what he delivered. So the ability of kind of Callum to put together that whole schedule, and even with the neat little graphics, right? Like it was really awesome when I was walking by that stage. They had a few breaks throughout the day, and there was like
Yeah.
this kind of some rolling ads, but also like coming up next, and then basically the schedule for the day was all right there. And so if you're somebody who is walking the show floor and you said like, hey, I want a 10-minute break, but like I want to go sit down and still be doing something with the show, it provided this really nice atmosphere for, if you're a developer who, again, doesn't have some big announcement that's going to be on a large stage, but there's still some sort of Q&A or updates you want to be able to give to interact with your audience and still be able to put some news out there. This was the perfect avenue for doing all of that. And so I'm thinking that this definitely comes back next year, definitely on the show floor. And hopefully FSElite has some ideas up their sleeves for how to make it even better.
Yeah, and we did have those all recorded. FSElite managed the recording of that. I'm hoping that's something we can keep doing, and it'll usually be to Rob's point here about the sort of video content all in one place. That will probably continue to be the case at FSElite does the video work on that stage, and so usually that'll mean that the content gets uploaded, a couple days after, and it's available on their YouTube channel. I don't know if we'll see that brought into the online only event, just because of some of the budget and the logistics stuff that work into having us have two stages that are recorded and streamed. But it's something we can look into. But I think it worked really nicely. And for me, it's like, okay, if you want to be, on the official Flight Sim Expo program, and you're like you want the big thing, like that's what the big stage is for. And this is like like the intimate, you have to be there to get it kind of thing. And yeah, we'll put the recording up, but like I really think this is an area that if you weren't at the show, it wasn't necessarily as meaningful for you to see. And I think they did a great job with all of the recordings. I watched a couple of those back because of course I didn't see any of them live, and I thought they did a really amazing job with like getting the good quality, great audio. Like I was worried a little bit that it was going to be hard for them with the camera equipment that they brought themselves to be able to do that, but I think it really worked out nicely. So I'm really happy with FS Elite. Huge partnership there that made that all happen and allowed us to put some really cool content out that I think we otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. All right, so Canadians, here you go. Here is the question that I get asked all the time from other Canadians about whether we should consider Canada for future cities. And I wouldn't say this is a no, but it's a pretty resounding question mark at least. So 64% said yes, they would consider having the event in Canada, 36% saying no. So, hard to project that number on 3,000 attendees. But if you're going to say, well, you're going to lose 40% of your audience by moving the show to a country that's pretty similar to the United States, that one is a bit of a tough one for us. So I don't think it's out of the question at some stage in the future. Like as we hopefully continue to grow this show, if we got to 4,000 or 5,000 attendees, I think one year to just gamble and say, well, let's try it in Vancouver or let's try it in Toronto, Montreal, see what happens. That's probably possible. The US dollar goes a long way in Canada right now. It's like 30-40%. So you can think of it like everything is 30 or 40% off. Hotels, food, that makes it a lot easier. Travel's a little bit more expensive, and obviously you need to have a passport as well. So I think from an exhibitor perspective, the other thing that's important for us to think about is that all of the US based exhibitors having to import their stuff into Canada, that is a pretty big expense that you don't necessarily see in the US. There's a tax implication in Canada that you don't have in the US. So there's two pretty big roadblocks that I see there, both customs related passports for attendees and then just like logistics costs for exhibitors that I wonder about. We've fair number of Canadian exhibitors too, but that's the thing that has me wondering. So we at least asked the question for the first time. These are the results, gives you something to think about. And I wouldn't say it's a no, but it's definitely not like, people are necessarily ready to go right away. That's my reaction.
Yeah, the devil's in the details in this one. Like you mentioned it with the customs and the duty tariffs that you don't necessarily have in the United States. There's also just logistics of us as a show operating in a foreign country. What does that look like? So I say that the fact that we've got it's not a no based on this pie chart that we have here, but there's a lot of other logistics that would have to fall into place favorably in order to make this actually happen. In addition to actually finding a venue that would work for us. And to your point, already said here, if you extrapolate this number, are you willing to take a risk of 35% of your audience saying we're not going to go that year? And I know that's a little bit of a push there. That might not be exactly the correct extrapolation, but there's certainly a risk. And so that risk is going to be harder to assume when you're in a 2,500 person show versus when you're a 5,000 or a 6,000 person show. So I'm not saying never, but I don't think it's in the near term.
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to venues, which is always a challenge anyway. But I would love to see this show like find a museum like the one in Lelystad, and it's just like that's the place we go every year. And I'm still convinced that doesn't exist anywhere in the U.S. And I want somebody to prove me wrong so badly. But if you look at Canada, you're not going to find a Vegas or an Orlando. There will not be a hotel that has a big enough convention center attached. So you're looking at a big city downtown convention center, which in the U.S. we are definitely priced out of. And hard to tell in Canadian cities. Like I think we would be priced out of the downtown Toronto one, the downtown Vancouver one. Nathan says that Calgary's got a brand new one, so maybe there's something there. But I agree, Dennis. Like you build it, they will come. It's probably true. You put the event there, you tell people, you tell enough people, get enough sponsors and exhibitors on board. It probably does happen. I think if we were ever going to consider that, more seriously, it would be a question to our developers first to say, okay, like which of you guys would drop out if we did move the show. And I think all of your internationals, they're traveling anyway, but there'd definitely be some I can think of who are US based who probably decide, you know what, we're going to skip that one. So tough call, but it's something that we definitely wanted to consider. And it's almost fun. Like I'll go around, people will ask me at the show, we'll be in a group and they're like, what about Canada? And I'll just say, okay, who here is American? And hands go up and I'm like, okay, now how many of you have a passport? And it's like 3 out of 7 or 10. And so that's a big thing for us to go, okay, is somebody going to go out and get a passport just to come to Flight Sim Expo? I mean, maybe, but that's something that we definitely would be, thinking about risk-wise when it comes to future shows. Oh yeah, weekend seminars. This is a good one. So we asked you what your favorite was, kind of an attendee choice awards type thing of the various educational weekend seminars that we did. Here are the top 5 seminars. Pretty good distribution on this one. So the most popular one, which is the VATSIM seminar held by Brandon, was 16.2%. So that shows you that a lot of people have different interests, and I think that's exciting and that's a good thing. But if I look at the theme across these top 5, there is a lot about real world aviation. There's a lot about VATSIM. There's a lot about online ATC and kind of like how do you fly your airplane. And also good to see the PC build on stage, which has been a pet project of mine for like 4 years now. I've been trying to do what we were able to do with Viral PC this year. I'm really happy to see that was popular too. So again, like you look at the first place at 16%, the fifth place at 8%, and you could go down to like the 10th place, and they're probably at like 8.3. So definitely a wide variety of interests and people kind of going to and liking the seminars that match with their interests, which of course just makes sense. Anything on the seminars from you, Phil?
No, I think you covered it here.
Okay, cool. And we had a couple other users' choice things. People were voting on their favorite exhibitor, their favorite FSExpo Friday session. We're going to save some of that for the beginning of next year and try to do that in a little bit of a nice way to kick off the show next year. But I want to talk about this one. This is a great quote. It's a direct quote from somebody in the survey. I'll read it out loud and then we'll talk a little bit about it. The quote says, and of course I don't know who it's from, we really need more focus on people who freely give their efforts to the hobby. People who build innovative utilities for free. YouTube is full of these people doing really cool things, and none of that seems to make it into FS Expo. It really is disappointing. So that was the comment out of the survey, and I think this comment is something that really resonates with Phil and myself. It goes hand in hand with the comments of why wasn't this developer at the show? And it's like we know and we are trying, and this is where we need the community to help us out. Like we book the venue and we kind of do the logistics, but it comes down to the developers to support the show and attend, and it comes down to those people who are making those YouTube videos to actually make it to the show. So we have obviously some amazing media partners, some of whom are watching with us right now, but it's like how do you get those people and those names who you might be watching to make the trip, to come on the stage, to actually do that? That's something that I think Phil and myself both feel like is, we try, we make the outreach, we send them the emails, but we need the community to go and actually push that further forward. So I had a number of people right after this year's show who were like, hey, I just dropped a message to Developer X and said, why weren't you at the show? And they responded and they're like, yeah, we're going to think about it next year. That is what we need. So if you're watching, whoever wrote this great comment, if you're watching somebody on YouTube and you're like, this person really should be at Flight Sim Expo on the stage, you've got to go tell them that and tell me that, and I'll also reach out to them. But the more we can have these people like understanding what the show is and understanding how important it is for them to come out. I know our media partners do great work in sharing that message. You also could do some great work in sharing that message. And so that's why I wanted to bring this quote up. It definitely wasn't the only one, but it's one of the ones that I thought just really well expressed, like the thing that always bothers me and Phil. It's like there's 70 or 80 or 90 exhibitors at this show, but we're reaching out to 500. We need more people to keep making this trip, to keep drinking the Kool-Aid, to figure out what the show is all about.
And I think that really cuts across everything in the sense that it's not just about go find a YouTuber who you're interested in and encourage them to attend the show, or go find a developer, but it also goes to other attendees, right? Like we were talking at the
Yeah.
beginning of this show, of like at the beginning of the seminar, we've got 2,500 people at the show, right? This year. That was a growth of 500. We have folks, even like I see Andrew was commenting about Seattle as a potential option for Flight Sim Expo. We know that Seattle is not an option for us given the existing size of the show, given hotel room rates in the convention center that is there. But as the show continues to grow, those types of venues could become an option. How do you get to a 2,500 person show to become a 5,000 person show? Everybody from the show goes home, tells a friend who hasn't been to the show about the show, and bring a friend next year, right? So if you're somebody who's like, yeah, I don't know any YouTubers, that doesn't mean that you're off the hook here, right? Go find a friend who's into aviation who hasn't heard of the show. Tell that person, bring that person next year. Or if you have a line to a developer, or if you're active on a developer forum, that's your avenue to go post on that developer's forum and say, hey, you weren't at the show. I really love to see you because I want to interact with you, et cetera, right? So everybody here has a role to play, and that's collectively what's going to make the show bigger and better every year. So you've heard my challenge. Go talk to a developer, go talk to a friend, or go talk to a content creator, get them to the show next year. And that is how we get from where we are today to, being able to have again 5,000+ people at a show that then puts us into a convention center in downtown, whatever your favorite city is. That's really the pathway here.
Yeah, and I think we're really trying when it comes to developers as well, looking at more ways to support smaller developers who want to come to the show. I mean, I think it's super accessible as it is, but there is more that we can do. So we talked about, and we probably will have some way for maybe 3 or 4 developers to like split a booth. That's been a thing that you could have done, but we'll try to make that maybe a little bit more formal this year around. But I really want, if you're a developer and you're watching, like it's so easy for you to come to this show. We make it super accessible. I've exhibited at other shows, and like the amount of work, you need a PhD to figure out like how the heck are you doing all this. We've really tried to make it easy for you. Yes, if you want to go do the big booth that you see Microsoft or Thrustmaster or WinWing or insert other name here, if you want to do that, like yes, there is some more logistics associated with it. But what I think most flight simmers want is for a developer to just show up with like a laptop if that's what you have and a piece of software running on it, or just like be there. I mean, they don't even care if you have something to show. Most people, if you're a big name, they'll already know about you. Even if you're not a huge name but you have a passionate customer base, like they'll already know about your product. They, and by they I mean the people watching, attendees, they want to meet you, they want to shake your hand, they want to share their feedback with you. And so if we can get some more of the software developers out to the show to understand that, I think that would be a huge win for us. That's something that, of course, every year we're always going back, going, how do we get more developers to keep coming to the show? How do we get more of the folks who are watching on YouTube to actually physically make the trip down to Providence and hang out with us? I'm gonna try and read some chat here, Phil. So you got anything to say on that?
No, I think your comment is good. In general, I think as an extension of this comment, one of the things that we also saw in the survey, which we've seen in every survey in the past we've done for this entire event, is always there weren't enough exhibitors. I wish there was more exhibitors, or why wasn't exhibitor X there, right? And so we've kind of talked about it a little bit here, but I think the one thing that we can all agree on is that there is never a point where we're going to say we have too many exhibitors. There can always be more. And
Yeah,
that, again, that cuts not just across the flight sim developer community, but like we can get real world aviation in there, we can get PC companies in there, right? Like there are so many extensions or like adjacent industries to what we do as the core flight simmer that are all relevant towards the show. And so, again, it's not always about just going to post on a forum, but if you have a friend of a friend who works at an airline or whatever, and if you can get it in there,
yeah.
all of that is meaningful to us, right? Like part of this is not so much, if we just have a contact or an email or somebody we can call, that even goes a long way. So when we talk about this being a community-driven flight simulation convention, that is where all this comes from, is that it really is going to take all of us to really try and help grow the show year over year. And I know that everybody out there, if they really thought about it for a few minutes, would probably have a connection or something they can turn up to really help to that degree.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna bring up the chat here on the stream as well, and kind of open it up to some questions here as we're about an hour in already, which is crazy because it goes by fast. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. And if we didn't mention something that you wanted to hear about, now would be a great time to bring that up. I've got a couple questions that I want to just hit on quickly. Scott asked a great question, which was kind of what was the feedback like from some of the developers. I don't have the developer survey ready to go right now, but we did do a developer survey as well. I think about 25 people filled that out, and generally pretty much reflective of what you saw in the attendee survey. So very positive feedback overall about the show, about the experience. Definitely people in the developer community feel that we're doing the right thing when it comes to pricing. So it's usually something like $5,000 or $6,000 to get a booth at a show like this. The internet is usually double that. People are very happy that those aren't our prices. And I think we've really tried to make it accessible, and I think that shows through in the developer feedback. So overall, I feel like most people had a good experience. Talked to some developers in some of the debrief discussions, and people really had a good experience. As always, the thing that they're saying is like the attendees are phenomenal. So they always talk about just how exciting it is to meet people like you guys, to be able to see the smiles and the passion on your faces throughout the course of the show. That's what keeps them coming back. So I think just in terms of the quick summary on what we found from developers, that was the main thing. Phil, did you have anything else from the developer survey that you kind of that struck you?
I think your point about the positive vibes of the attendees is really important, right? Like, I think you mentioned at the beginning of the presentations on Friday, where like that is one of the primary reasons. That's one of the primary reasons that we hear developers coming to the show for, right? It's not because they want to sell product necessarily. It's because they want to interact with
Yeah,
you guys, the attendees, right? Who are the consumer. And your positive energy is what brings them back to the show. We kind of talk about how, especially at least modern times and the era of keyboard warriors and forums and YouTube comments, not everything is super positive, right? It's pretty easy to go out there and start griping about something or other. It's much more meaningful when there's an in-person conversation to be able to talk about either constructive criticism, if there is any of that, or be able to really understand who the person is that is buying and using your product, right? Like, that face-to-face conversation is very, very meaningful. And the positive energy that we've had really at every year of the show is, again, what kind of keeps developers coming back. And so that is something that you as the attendees really help bring to the show and help make it what it is. And so keep doing that. Like, that is something that we need to continue so that we can, again, attract more exhibitors and more developers to the show in the future.
100%. Yeah. Comment just about the media partner booth, which, very crowded. Yes, but like that was sort of a little bit the point. And I loved that space. I mean, that was totally a Q8 pilot thing. It was his idea. He funded the whole thing. It was so cool to see that come to life. It had the nice FSExpo lighting. We had the backdrop. People were doing interviews there. I think it was a really, really cool space. I would love to be able to keep doing that year over year. Hopefully Q8 is able to help support us again with that in 2025. But I think we'll definitely keep that going. And it was really nice to see a place for streamers to actually stream right from the show. So I think that was really cool. I want to hit on this point. A couple people, James mentioned that it was easy to find people to make friends with and never felt alone from day one. Derek said the same thing. Came alone, was nervous, but everyone, vendors, attendees, were so welcoming and friendly, sharing their stories. Experiences were just great. I'm curious because we got some comments that were the opposite of that in the survey. Some people who were like, you know what, I had a tough time like making friends, and we do get that comment every now and again. And I have a tough time with that one because I'm like, well, I feel like we do a fair bit to connect you, and I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there. Even thinking about the themed tables we had at the social, where you could meet up with people in your local area, even though there weren't that many, there were at least a couple there. You've got the locations right on the badge, so if you were looking for somebody in your area, you can hopefully find them. So I don't know how we like find a way to make that even bigger and better. And if people have ideas, drop them in the chat. Send them to me as well if you want to directly. But that's something that we're just trying to figure out. Okay, like I think we do a lot already there. What can we do to make it even more? And even think like the activities would be another way. Like if you were like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, well, we had opportunities for you to go buy a Penn and Teller ticket and hang out with the group there. So it's like, what else can we do to just kind of keep building that community aspect around the show? That's a question for us for sure.
And I think one thing to also think about as part of that is how would you like to hear or be communicated that those things are happening? Because to Evan's point with the theme tables, like we sent out a number of emails as to attendees ahead of time saying this was happening. There was, of course, on Friday before we actually broke to go and do the Friday evening social, there was part of a slide that said, hey, this is where these things are happening. And then again, sort of the reaction was somewhat lukewarm. So what is the right way to communicate that those things are happening? Because apparently, according to some of the survey feedback, what we've been doing hasn't necessarily hit home. And at the same time, as event organizers, we're sitting here saying, well, we're emailing you. This is part of a presentation in front of an audience. Like, what other ways should we be trying to communicate that out? So open to hearing ideas on that front as well.
Yeah, and like I get, we're flight simmers, like Mike says, and some of us are introverts for sure. But like that to me has always been what's cool about the show is like you can go up to anybody and talk to them, and you're like making a conversation right away because it's like, oh, you're from here, I'm from there, or it's like, well, what airplanes do you like to fly? Like it's that usually is easier than I find at like I was just at an event at a baseball game last night with a bunch of other pilots who all work at the same kind of general airline that I work at, and it's like I didn't make conversation with anybody because I'm like I don't know what do I want to talk to you guys for, but with flight sim it's like okay we all share the same hobby, so there's always kind of something there. So I definitely think that's something for us to keep thinking of. And hey Brandon, by the way, your session was the most popular if you didn't see that earlier on the slide, so congrats on that. We have to do some more VAT USA VAT some stuff I guess at next year's show. There was something, I don't know if there was anything else that we wanted to hit on, Phil. Oh yeah, sorry, the one I was going to talk about was the real world airlines piece, unless you have something else.
No, go for it.
Okay, probably one of my last thoughts here, unless we have any other questions, just having a look through the chat. But one of the things that has been a challenge in recent years, I think during COVID, we had a ton of interest from real world aviation. And I would say that almost seems like it's tailing off a little bit. So I know I got a couple comments in the survey about like, where are the airlines and where are the flight schools? And I'm like, yeah, I know. Where are those people? Like we reached out to every flight school. Phil made the list. Thank you for that, by the way. And then I sent the emails and made the phone calls to every flight school in and around the Vegas area. And the pitch to them was, we want to give you free exhibit space. Come to the show and sell Discovery flights to our attendees. There's a bunch of people here who want to be pilots who are from the area. Go sell them a Discovery flight. And we got 0 takers. Not a single flight school showed up. What was cool is we had the Sky Combat Ace folks show up, and they sold, I forget exactly the number, but like enough things to have made it worth it for them to come out to the show. And so that was awesome. Like there's clearly a market for this. You think last year in Houston we had the museum did like a record number of warbird sorties. Like people in flight sim want to fly real airplanes. Duh. So I don't know what we can do to like get the airlines and get the flight schools to get that message, because instantly you'd have 10 or 15 more exhibitors at the show if you could convince some of the airlines. You think about even the Air Force, like why aren't we having recruiting events at these kinds of things? And I don't know how we solve that problem, because I see them at a lot of other things. I see them at some of the like smaller even events that happen at local airfields and AOPA fly-ins. Like it's like they'll go to a 20-person event and it's like here's 3,000 flight simmers, but you don't want to pay attention to us. Like come on. So that's one of the ones that I find is difficult, and we're going to have to keep working on that one too.
Yeah, and it's not an excuse, but one thing to keep in mind with that is that the aviation recruiting industry is cyclical, and right now we're definitely in a trough,
This is
given
true.
that there's a lot of hiring that's being paused at the airline. So, sure, you're always going to find your airlines probably going to like an Oshkosh, where it's just kind of like we do this every year, but we're definitely more of a fringe event where we have to try and basically get part of their annual recruiting budget to say, yes, this is an event worth attending. And right now at the airlines, at least the majors anyway, a lot of that funding is probably going to be lighter than it normally would be in a at least in a boom year, so to speak. So that's definitely one thing that we're going against. But again, you got a room of 3,000 aviation enthusiasts. You'd think that would be a something you want to try and target versus your generic career fair where it might be aviation people plus whomever else. So that's one of the things where again it comes back to like if there's somebody who has an email of somebody in an airline who works at the recruiting department, that is the key. And so I know there's folks out there who have those kinds of contacts. Please let us know.
Yeah, and I think we're moving in the right direction. Like somebody reminded me, thank you for that, that Riddle was there, Embry-Riddle
Mm-hmm.
Aeronautical University. That was nice to see, and we had Civil Air Patrol. So
And
there's
by the
definitely
way,
like a little bit.
Riddle is there because one of our volunteers went to Riddle and
True.
has a direct
Yeah.
connection to the recruiting department, right? So that's the kind of connection I'm discussing here.
Yeah, and there's an airline that we've been trying for a number of years that a dispatcher from the airline comes to the show. This year he was like officially there, so I can probably say that it was United. And so Matt Bartles, who was one of our speakers this year, was like officially there from United, which was awesome. And so maybe that's an inroad to us seeing something more permanent there. And like totally get that maybe it's not the right thing for the airline recruiting market at this particular minute in time, but what about flight schools? And you could just keep going down that list. So I don't know how we try to convince them a little bit more, and like the company that makes airplane models that like wouldn't come to our show, although I think maybe they had another conflicting event that weekend. I don't know, but that's something to think about. So we're always looking for new ways to look at growing the show, whether that's in aviation. You heard me talk earlier about other forms of simulation. Like, is there a sim racing component to this show at some point in the future? Is there a driving area? Is there I don't know, goat simulator? I don't, there's other stuff out there. I don't know anything about it, but it exists. And so maybe there are ways to help bring in other forms of simulation to this show too. Sporties comes to the show every year. They made an announcement this year, but for them, it's like they haven't quite, I guess, understood, or maybe they don't think, maybe they're right. Maybe there isn't enough of a value in like trying to sell actual aviation gear. But like I totally think that there is, and I think they could sell some flight sim stuff there too. But it's just a question of like it's a big lift for a lot of companies and a lot of organizations to come out to the show, and I get that and I appreciate that. So if maybe it's just that's where we are in the cycle, but something that we're thinking about for sure. I think Phil, it sounds like I don't know if you've seen anything else that I missed or kind of wrapping up here.
No, I think we're good to wrap.
All right. Well, that might be the end of things for the time being, but it is only for the time being. We'll be back. You'll have to hear our voices again sooner than later. We are back, of course, in June at the Rhode Island Convention Center in Providence. We got off a phone call, one of our first kind of big planning calls with them just a couple of days ago, and I am in the weeds right now with show service providers and AV and internet and electrical and all that good stuff. And we'll start our attendee kind of at least travel info should come out in the next couple of weeks. Then after that will come our attendee registration as in December type time frame. Exhibitor outreach also kind of starts in around that time frame with the exhibit booths sort of first announcement of who's coming to the show typically in March. Activities will come out in April, May, and then of course the show will be here just before we know it in June. So lots for us to do and to share and to think about as a flight sim community. But I think for now, if you have any questions about the show, any other feedback for us, any other ideas, you know where to find us. Scott, thank you for the email on the Air Force Museum. I'll talk to you more about that. Not a great story, unfortunately, there, but something that we can think about and talk about a little bit. And again, by all means, please do send us a note if you have anything you want to talk about. Otherwise, be a little bit quiet for the next couple of weeks as we pull all this information together, and then probably early type September kind of time frame, look for some of that detail around travel, some of the early travel discounts, hotel booking links, and that kind of stuff. So I think that basically wraps up for today. Phil, any last words, comments, thoughts from you as we wrap up?
I'm mostly good. Thanks to those of us. Thanks to those of you guys who attended the event and attended this seminar as well. It's always kind of fun to be able to do kind of this live back and forth because you
Yes.
don't get the opportunity to do this at the show because we're busy running a show. So this has been super fun. And as we've mentioned, if you take away one thing from what I'm saying here, bring a friend next year.
Absolutely. Rob says 7,741 hours to go, but
Oh,
who's counting?
perfect.
So thanks again, guys. Great chat, great discussion. Appreciate y'all, and we'll be back together before we know it. Till then, we'll talk to you on the next FSA webinar on VATSIM somewhere or whenever our paths next meet. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks again, everybody. Take care.